the more you try and describe yourself, the more you have to just describe almost like how your view of yourself within humanity. I just try to see that largely we all have the capacity to translate love through things. People can fall in love with art and music in a way that they don't feel intimidated, and they can reach it at wherever they need to reach it at in their life, whatever time, that there's something perhaps cerebral somewhere in there that can also be attached to, but that's not necessary.
Hello everyone, I'm Rodney Veal. I'm the host of Rodney Veal's Inspired By. I'm in our CET studios. I love saying the word location we're in, but I'm going to have hopefully a really cool, great conversation with a cool, great guy that I've just discovered via digitally, but in his music and the bands that he's been with. But he's also an artist and a musician and a composer and a big thinker and a reimaginer of art and art making and collaboration, because that seems to be his jam on top of improv. Give it up for Dave King.
Hello, how are you doing? Thanks for having me.
Totally my pleasure. I mean, this podcast is kind of like talking to folks about their inspiration, and I feel like sometimes I'm doing This Is Your Life,
sure,
in the very beginning, but because I'm kind of curious, because no one ever just says I'm going to be a reimaginer of Nirvana's Teen Spirit and Rite of Spring Stravinsky through a jazz lens and a musician's lens. I mean, that's bold, and so that boldness, was that the out of the womb, would you say you were absolutely going to be a musician or an artist? Or what was your first motivation for creativity?
Well, that's a great question, and it's really nice to get to talk about these things because, and in fact, even just the fact that you have this art podcast, I should tell you, I had a radio show for a few years that I did profiles on jazz musicians and tried to make it kind of entertaining and doing whatever. And I've thought to myself, it's really nice when you can have these discussions with that. From the standpoint of how things begin and where people, their trajectory of how they start, whatever failures they've had or successes that create their sort of path. And I've thought about the possibilities of that myself, so I hope you don't mind. I'm just going to take all of your ideas and make my own podcast first and foremost. So you heard it here right now.
Run with it. I'm just kidding. I started dancing. I'm like, riff, baby, riff. Because I'm into the improv. I mean,
I just love getting to be able to talk about the process, and so thanks for that opportunity.
Absolutely.
I think that just like anyone, I started thinking about music really young. I was 4 or 5 years old. There was a piano in the house, but I didn't come from a family of like artists that were saying like, this is possible. It was more like, music education is good. I grew up in the 70s, and it's like this idea that people are becoming more and more aware of how music could affect the way anybody thinks about school or anything. It's like it's an important part of your brain and opening yourself up creatively, and that's how it began with me. But it kind of hit me early, my love of it, my love of either being able to just sit at a piano and play a theme to a movie or figure something like that out. I think that's what my first moment of thinking, I could control this thing. Like I don't have to, I can play the Close Encounters, da 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 da. And I could go down and do that whenever I wanted. When I wasn't at school, I could just go down there and do that. That made me have a sense that I could be a part of at least making something when I wanted it to happen. You know what I mean? The immediacy of saying like, I want to hear that again. I'll just play it. And I think that, I was into all the normal things too that anyone, I played sports. I was, I thought, I was kind of a quiet, but kind of like, internal, trying to be funny to myself. I had all these dreams of like, maybe I'll be comedic or I'll be, but it always came back to that idea of creative thinking. Even in athletics, it was like how I could think creatively, not be a part of the normal sort of herd that goes in that world.
Absolutely.
And that's why I've even to this day, like I love it if I see like an eccentric athlete, somebody that's not fitting in, and it makes me think like they're already trying to think differently than the herd mentality. And so I think that's how I began my it started to zero in more on music. I started playing the drums in school band when I was 10 years old, and you can't really play piano in the school band, so it was like you got to pick an instrument if you want to be in band.
So you had to pick one.
And to pick one, I was like, well,
drums are pretty cool.
Drums, yeah.
I
was like,
coolest instrument.
You hit these things. Let's try this, and it really stuck. And I think ever since I really just used the piano as a compositional tool. I can play piano, but not on a level where I can't sit there and blow bebop solos and things like that. But I can definitely use it as my writing tool, and that's how I kept my piano education going throughout the rise of like drumming and in my life, but also composing, which has always been there for me. Oh, yeah. So I've never been I've never thought about myself as just a drummer. I've always thought about myself as a musician. That I use this instrument. I use the piano to write. And that's how I communicate these ideas. And so that's I've always just thought of it all as one thing. It's like creativity is sort of one thing.
Not just in the sense that you were like saying to yourself, like narrowing your own lane.
Right.
Because as artists, we can do that.
Absolutely.
Sometimes we go, I'm only this, but I'm like, I'm all into like, well, it's more than just the one thing.
It is.
And I love that voyage of discovery. And I don't think people really understand when people encounter you just as a drummer. I keep thinking, no, there's more.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that you designed did you design all the album covers?
Most of them, yeah.
I mean, you've got a great visual sense and a great sensibility about composition of art and creativity. So I'm like, oh, this guy's all in. And you just seem to enjoy it. Like, there's a joy to it. So
absolutely. When
you were in school and you're playing the drums, how did people respond to the fact that you were in that lane? Because a lot of times, I don't know, Ohio, you're from the Midwest.
Yeah, I'm from Minneapolis.
You know, well, the Minneapolis sound. I mean, I think people would assume that anyone playing an instrument is like, okay, you're pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question of like, of course, a community and what people view as possible. And I'd say that most certainly anywhere in the world you run up against obstacle thinking as far as what is the road there. It can be a very lonely feeling to be like there isn't a system. Maybe if you live in New York or you have some sort of system that you had a relative that had a career in something, and then they take you on your wing and go, no, this is possible. You kind of have to create the I'm sure you know this, if you obviously do, that you have to sort of create the opportunity for yourself, almost like in the lane of like, don't stop, so no matter what, if I just keep the love there. And I just talked about this today at a high school. I was just like, well, how do you answer this question of like, how do you get there? It's almost like, well, you recognize that love is a huge component. And we think about love, we think about people, we think about whatever, but why you love what you love is also real love, and that's a hugely powerful emotion, as we know. And when we fall in love with something and some process, that combination of loving it and not ever giving up on it, then it becomes like, well, that is itself a success. You never gave up on the love you had for the thing, and therefore for me that begat this, begat that, begat this. It was like, oh, I failed at these types of things along the way. I didn't get like that didn't succeed right away, that didn't whatever, but it just kept going and using whatever those experiences were. So I think back then in Minnesota and just being a part of a sort of just like, oh, you mentioned it, there's a music community, so you're not just in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
There's an art community there, where I was able to go to, take the bus and go to the Walker Art Center and hear some avant-garde musicians and see paintings and whatever. But I had to do it myself. There wasn't like a team of people.
There wasn't like let's get everybody on a school bus and we're going to go.
It wasn't a crew of, it was a few of us.
Yeah.
And oddly, a few of those people that I grew up with there's a few of them became, along with the bassist of the Bad Plus, we grew up together, we became internationally recognized jazz musicians and creative musicians, including the pianist Craig Taborn, who we grew up with from Minneapolis, and we stuck with it. We had to earn that thing of like, no one is feeding us this stuff. We have to find it. We got to go to the library and we got to listen to these albums.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. There was
absolutely.
You and I know there was
not back in the day. Our streaming was you had to show up.
Yeah,
you had to literally show up, and so I mean, what I love about that, and that when you say, like I said, I did a little research, and that was it seemed to be that driving force, like the library, the PBS. I mean, the fact that you mentioned, the tattoo.
Yeah, I
you
have a
the
PBS tattoo.
PBS, he has a PBS tattoo, and I thought, all right, you're in the family, you're in the mix to the people. We're the ones trying to think differently. I'm thinking about differently about content, and so the fact that you were thinking like this, and the fact that you could take the bus to the Walker Center, I am incredibly jealous. Yeah. That is one incredible art museum
top
space.
5. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a space. And folks, if you ever you need to go. You really need to experience the building, but then their exhibitions are stellar. Yep. I mean, I 2 trips there. I went on vacation, but my vacations are always like, and we're going to stop at the museum, right?
Absolutely,
I'm like, I cannot. Too. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't. I don't understand people who go to a place. You never went to the museum in that city. Go to the museum.
You have to see the museums, absolutely.
Like, why?
That's a special place for sure. For everything, for dance, for music, for
absolutely
visual art, for everything.
And they were really invested in that. And so you mentioned that your classmates who ended up forming the Bad Plus, which is, I mean, that in and of itself, most people would say, I'm going to start a rock band.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to be the next pop sensation. They're never like, let's be very real. I'm going into jazz.
No, I know. It wasn't common.
Not common at all. And what was the response when you guys kind of how did you form the idea that was the path for all of you? Because you could have chosen another vehicle. You could have chosen another genre of music.
Sure, absolutely. I think it's the thing where you come, you're growing up and like we're all funneled through these systems of, okay, you hear music on TV maybe, or you hear it I grew up in the 70s, you hear radio, whatever radio it was, whether it was R&B, whether it was classic rock, whatever it was, classical music, there's music there if you want to check it out. So then it's just like, okay, maybe we could put together a garage band or something. And you're 12 years old, you're 13 years old. I want to start playing. The dream kind of begins there, and then you're just like, how do you do this, right? So nobody can really. There aren't a series of teachers that are like, well, this is how you play a Led Zeppelin tune, or this is how you whatever. And then for a lot of us, younger musicians that I started to gravitate, like in school or wherever, it was more like. What all of a sudden somebody was hip to something that was even more mysterious. So then all of a sudden you're like, what is this prog rock thing all about? And then it you listen to Genesis or something, and like you could tell there's a musicianship that's happening that's not just the standard rock thing.
Right.
And then all of a sudden somebody's like, have you heard Miles Davis? Blah 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 blah. And then you go, whoa. And then it starts to go. And then your interest becomes like, I'm less satisfied right now with maybe the mainstream version of what music is. And I'm starting to hear that there's this world of this extremely sophisticated and soulful and everything that kind of makes you want to connect to something with your humanity.
Yeah.
And so your brain and your humanity are being ignited. And then that becomes like, this is mysterious. What is this? And I think that a few of us, like I mentioned, Reed and Craig and the first pianist of the Bad Plus, Ethan Iverson, who grew up near Minneapolis, we all gravitated towards what was next. It was like somebody heard this record by the Art Ensemble of Chicago or something.
Right.
And you're like, wait a minute, wow, what is that? It was just an openness and a hunger for things that were not mainstream, so it can kind of give you that high, right? Of the like punk rock maybe gave people.
Yeah.
We were talking about the Pixies earlier.
Yeah, that little high of like all of a sudden.
Like, I'm into the Pixies. You ever heard of that?
Right. It's like, guys.
Pixies were an indie band that not a lot of people knew of in 1988. Right. And all of a sudden it starts to go, and then you're like, I was an OG Pixies fan or something. You have that badge. Well, for us, jazz
became that.
Yeah, Eric Dolphy became that.
Okay.
Sun Ra became that. Paul Motion became that.
Okay.
Keith Jarrett, and then you make your way back. Like, well, you make your way further back. Well, what's bebop all about?
Right, because what excited you about them? What excited them to become who they are?
Yeah.
So it's almost like
correct.
It almost becomes like the scrolling.
Yes.
You like, let me scroll
right.
down
right.
into like this is where the through line goes.
Right.
Versus, I think it's much more satisfying when it's the voyage of discovery of the new.
Yeah.
Like
absolutely.
I'm so intrigued. Like my favorite artist is Mark Bradford. I just,
incredible. Yes.
But then he has a through line to Charles White.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, well, what inspires Charles White? And I just keep going down the rabbit hole. And then it's, 5 hours later, and I'm like, I've gotten no work done because I'm staring at great art.
Absolutely.
And now I feel like with you guys doing that, and this is pre-digital, which means you literally had to go buy the album or get it from the library.
Or get it from the library. Did that a lot when you didn't have any money, and you just got to find it yourself. And then that's kind of what it was. It was just like, okay, well, we had to make this world for ourselves. There was no jazz program in high school that was doing anything progressive. So already by the time I was 15, 16, it was like, we're not going to play. It's not like you're thinking that you're better than anything, but your consciousness is expanded beyond what the normal consciousness was allowing in those confines. And so it was more like we had to find it. And to fall in love with it, do it, search it out, like you said, and then zero in. For me, it was zeroing in on what the eras were that were really hitting me. I'm like, okay, bebop, swing era jazz. I had to check it out because I had to check out who got Thelonious Monk, like thinking that far outside the norm. Okay, so then
what was the trigger point for that?
Yeah, and then then I would start to realize, well, really, starting in around the late 50s and forward. Through the 70s, even into the neo jazz movement of the 80s with Wynton Marsalis and Branford Marsalis, which I love both of them, and all of those schools plus the 80s avant-garde. But really, the late 50s into the 60s, I was zeroing in on Ornette Coleman. I was zeroing in on Thelonious Monk. I was zeroing in on Bill Evans. I was zeroing in on Miles, and all these bands that were like, this is touching me beyond this sort of like academic nature of some of the jazz or large ensemble music like swing era jazz.
That sense of that internal connection
Correct.
To the sound, the internal connection to the thoughts behind the making of the sound.
Right. And the more interactive it became. Like in the 60s, the bands were interacting more, less like there was a language to support. Like you have Charlie Parker, but then you got Max Roach and these incredible bands, but they're more organisms of like, for me, they were back there like dealing on the highest level, but propagating some sort of leader-centric idea. Like Charlie Parker is the voice. And of course, there are all these other voices and they're geniuses. But once you hit the Coltrane Quartet era, the Miles Quintet, second grade quintet era of the 60s, you're hearing a collective effort. To me, you're hearing more that band sound where people are getting in the mix with each other. It's less of this like overt support system. Would John Coltrane have been at that level of torrential spirit genius without that Elvin Jones component on drums, without that Jimmy Garrison component? Of course, all the great bebop masters had their engines firing underneath the sort of leader situation. But for me, it became apparent, like the more collaborative almost, the more in the mix all the instruments were, the more excited I got. It felt like there was a visceral component in it that started to ignite. Like this to me is not just like, you play the head, you back up the soloist, trade a little bit, play the head out. This was more like, well, what you can't say that about Coltrane living.
No,
you can't say that about Sunship. It's like, whoa, where's that going? It's like taking you on a journey that's different. And so that's when I started to identify that's a galactic family I'd like to at least humbly attempt to have my own voice within in my own generation. Instead of feeling like, well, we're never going to do that because that's been done on the highest level.
Right.
But we can know that language and learn from it.
But isn't that just, in many ways, it's like, because I think about it in these terms, because I think about as a dancer, I can only evolve as a movement maker beyond those that I, like you, get excited about. And it was, the only way I could do that was videotape. It was like, I could see the great masters, and then I got a chance, an opportunity to dance some of their works, and so I got to understand the difference between you're playing with you're dancing with the music to dancing within
That's, yeah.
and embodying
Exactly.
was a completely different level of artistry.
Exactly.
So, but recognizing that there's other things, factors, because our society and our world has evolved.
Yes.
That informs that. So, where they didn't have that system of libraries where there was all this information you can get access to, we are products of thank you to American society that believes in library systems, because that's where we could get the information to inform those people who didn't necessarily need to have their hand. You weren't holding, like, no one held your hand.
No,
you
no
guys
one
said,
told
you were like,
what was
I'm
the thing
doing.
to listen to. You had to figure it out.
Figure it out.
Same with the dance. It's just like, what is this? And
What is this like? And you search it out. And so I think there's such parallel tracks to that. When you decide to become a creator, that you have to decide: are you just imitating?
Yep.
Or are you just deciding I'm going to do it my way? And not in the sense of an arrogance. It's just my way in the sense of it's going to evolve.
Exactly. You're humbly standing on the shoulders, and you're very humbly learning the text.
Absolutely. And then it just flows out of you. This is a kind of a question. You're at a place now with art and sound making. Is it easier now of a flow? I always love the flow now than it was when you guys first started with the Bad Plus.
Well, I suppose as keeping the engine going.
Well, how that when you first start, it's like the engine's kind of stop, start, trial and error, like you said, failure. Absolutely. Talk to me what that was like in those early days before it ever got to the place where people said, "Hey, these guys are onto something."
Well, that's sort of like let's say let's say a little bit before the mature work starts to begin, right?
Right.
Artists, some people, of course, they have a voice really young, and I can't believe that myself.
I am shocked by that, but sometimes I'm like, dang, some of my students were like that.
It's scary, and of course some of the great jazz heroes were like that. Tony Williams was like that, where he's 19 playing with Miles Davis with a totally unique voice, and so you're just sort of like, well, okay, that's not me. But what I am is I was able to. I think emulation is important to a certain point where if you're learning how to do something, the heroes that you're connecting to, that they connected to something and they imitated it at the beginning. They did. There's no way they weren't checking out the music and going, well, how do you do that? And you sound like, well, that's how you do it. You sound like this person. You sound like Max Roach. You sound like whatever. And then hopefully from there, the journey, your individualism starts to appear through your love, through your dedication to the craft, through your whatever, is you start to realize, of course, we're all one of one. We're all individuals, no matter what our life experience, no matter what suffering you've had. Everyone has had suffering. Everyone has had highs and lows within their human trajectory. How do we translate that into a personal touch, a personal sound, a personal whatever? And that became something for me, is I had to make a conscious break from knowing that I had these influences. I loved Paul Motian and Jack DeJohnette, and I loved Elvin Jones, and I loved Jeff Watts and Joey Barron and all these great drummers from different generations before me. But I knew that a part of me, my love of it, my emulation of it, I had to break free without. I don't believe in this. You've got to destroy your heroes to find yourself. I believe it's got to be more subtle than that. Pushing away
more nuance,
far more nuance there, because you'll never destroy your heroes. Your heroes are your heroes for life.
I could never touch a Balanchine ballet to save my life. As a choreographer, I'm like, nope.
Yeah, you got to be able to say, you know what, that's that, and I'm this, and I have a validity of my perspective. Mm-hmm. I've done the work, especially when you've done the work of knowing these great masters and what they did, what they've been through, what everything, being able to humble yourself and say, in order to hang, I gotta know this text. I have to know this music, and I have to be in love with this music. The falling in love with it, something complex is hard. It can be hard. It can test your love.
It is. It's challenge. It's a challenge. Like Stravinsky is a challenge.
It is a challenge.
It's like
tremendous challenge.
And as a to dance and interpret it, it challenged my audio sensibilities about like, oh wait,
Oh, yeah.
wait, it created worlds for me once I stopped the resistance. I was like, why am I resisting this?
Yeah.
Because it's speaking to something that you weren't ready to speak to,
Right.
and it's pushing you over the edge. And I'm like, I'm okay. And then I'm like, just fall, Rodney. And then I'm like, it felt good. But it taught me a lot about being a performer. I think I was a better performer than I was.
Well, you learned how to land somehow, right?
Yeah, better performer than a technician. I mean, I would say that. And I.
But the world needs better performers than technicians.
That's how I played it. I had a pretty good run. And so so in this context of like now there's obviously like how much of the avant-garde world that you discovered at the Bat Plus could reside in the Midwest and Minneapolis. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, what was it? Because you went to. When did you guys make the leaps and saying, you know what, we know we got to take this on the road?
Yeah,
that's the part where I'm like,
that's years later. That's the trajectory of that particular band was throughout our entire 20s. We, those guys lived in New York. I lived in Los Angeles for a bit. We're finding our voices, and that's what I was kind of alluding to. Is there's a period of finding you're sort of playing the gigs, doing whatever sessions you can, finding how to do this thing. How do you play music for a living and you're not just trying to be a rock star or something? We didn't have interest in that. We had interest in creative music. And music that would be considered a part of the art spectrum via jazz, via new music, classical music, all these other things, but without a conservatory background, without a cushion of like, oh, well, my path is to be the principal percussionist, blah blah blah, or my path is to be a side person in jazz, and I hope to play with Carmen McRae someday. I hope to do it. It's more like, how do I find myself within this thing? Because I think we were naturally, the three of us were naturally kind of iconoclastic thinking. Like, not infinitely hireable mainstream versions,
Right.
Like, more like probably the wrong person for several situations, and it's good to know that early on. So then it's more like, okay, well, then how do I make my own job, And I think that
because you're in this lane,
right?
Like you're saying, it's not like, oh man, I can't wait to get that pushing me to the edge, avant-garde.
Yeah, you got to create
musicians.
Yeah.
This trio, I'm like, you're really speaking to asking the question of an audience to be as daring as you guys are.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a place for it.
Yeah.
I think that's what I
believe in the place for it.
Yeah, there absolutely is. And I think you've proven that there's an audience for it.
At least at this point, it's all about maintaining that there is a place for it. You get to a certain point. If you're wondering where it is now, if it's easier or if it's
right.
Well, the making of things is constantly expanding. You're always trying to grow and try to find new voices, but also as you know from the arts and the world of the arts, it's as competitive as any professional sport, if not more.
Yeah.
And because it's subjective, it's not like we can say, I draw the best, so I'm the best. That has nothing to do with it at the end of the day.
It means nothing on a planet of 7 billion plus people.
How many
I'm like,
people
really?
can draw that have nothing to say.
And that we have never seen until someone points it out or points a spotlight towards, and you realize, there you go.
Or you might be a technically great painter, but you have nothing to paint. You have no original idea. You have no nothing.
No.
So that's when you start to realize, well, the maintaining of a position of a unique perspective can be very difficult, and it's feast or famine sometimes. It's like, people are remembering, this band was really, they've made some of these things, but then there's this period where I kind of lost touch with it. We got to get those other people going again, but you got to make things without thinking about pleasing.
Wow, yeah.
Yourself. So there's this crevasse that you live in where you want to stay pure to your intent. Mm-hmm. But you also got to stay in there and keep building the audience.
Yeah,
and you want to reach people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But also reaching people on your terms, in the sense of, it's not about, I need instant gratification of lots of money, which I think
that's never going to happen.
Never going to happen.
I gave up on that a long time ago.
My favorite line to all my students, because I taught at a performing arts high school, I said, not everybody can be Beyonce, so let's let that go. Let us get in here and learn how to operate within the rehearsal space.
Correct.
I'm like, guys, it doesn't matter. You could hurt yourself literally right before the curtain goes up, and you're replaced.
Exactly.
So you should enjoy this part of the process because
Exactly.
this is where it is.
Yeah.
This is the sweet spot.
It is.
Do,
And that's
could
well
you, do,
put.
you, do you like the? I mean, I love rehearsal. So do you? I mean,
Well, how
or
about
connecting, or
Yeah, well, rehearsal can be deep when you, especially if you're presenting some of your music to a group, especially a collective like we have, where people take everyone's composition seriously in the band, so everyone composes separately. We almost have this rule: it's a democracy, but the composer has the right of way.
that the first right of refusal.
Yeah, sort of like you're open to interpretation, and at the same time you're like, but this is a key ingredient I need you to do.
Okay.
And then that person's got to do it. You know what I mean? And then it's like, of course, okay, I can dig it. Let's do it.
Okay.
So we figure out a way to share the music while also being able to have all these different composerly visions. And at that point, that's kind of gives you all those weapons. It's almost like Fleetwood Mac had 3 lead singers, right?
Right.
Not one. So they split up the lead vocal duties between 3 of the 5 members. Now you got all this repertoire that has a different voice, and it expands the repertoire hugely.
Absolutely.
So we were that way. We were that way as all 3 members, and including now that it's a quartet.
Which I was going to talk about.
All 4 write, and not together. We write separately. We're composers. We're not jamming it out together. And then when we get together, we beat it into shape together, and make an arrangement together that everyone is satisfied with. But if at the end of the day, if I'm not feeling a certain type of thing, but the composer's like, I just really need the center of this part on the drums to say this, then you've got to kind of step out of the way and say, the composer has a vision for this, and I might feel like I'm not getting to bring enough of me to it, but at the end of the day, it's a band. It's a band. It's not a me species.
It is, and that's the truest sense of bands being collaborative.
Correct, and that's rare in jazz.
Wow,
and
yeah.
that's why it had the thing. It's rare. It's very rare to have bands in jazz. Yes, it's a very leader-centric construct. It doesn't mean that, like I mentioned, Elvin Jones and Jimmy Garrison and McCoy Tyner before, the classic Coltrane Quartet, but you're hearing the words John Coltrane Quartet. So you're immediately seeing there's a leader. Mm-hmm. But anyone who knows that music knows there is no John Coltrane Quartet without those other 3 people. They're not subbable. And so that is a band. What we are a part of is the tradition that came more from rock, which is there's a band name. And so all of a sudden the identity is, wait a minute, it's a band name. It's not the Dave King Trio. It's not the Reed Anderson Trio. It's not the Ethan Iverson Trio. It's the Bad Plus. And it's those 3 guys, and it's never anybody else until it evolved. Where Ethan moved on after 18 years.
That is a long. Yep. Don't people think people understand?
That's a long time.
That's a long time.
And a lot of music and a lot of continents and a lot of concerts.
There's
and
a lot of places, a lot of experiences,
Yeah. And then Orrin Evans, the great pianist from Philadelphia, joined us for a few years. He was an old friend, and he kind of took over the piano. It was like stepping into a piano trio, realizing the piano does not lead the band. So that's amazing. Like, that's true. So you have these composers. There's no leader. He stepped in for a few great albums, and then he kind of wanted to focus back on his tremendous solo career. And so it was just like, okay, we can pivot here during the pandemic. Do we end it, or do we change the whole thing? And the founding members, me and Reed, the bassist, we were like, we wrote the lion's share of the original music, and the concept of kind of reimagining certain things kind of came, not to minimize anyone else's contribution, but at the end of the day, there were architects to the thing that had a larger role. And at that point, we realized it wouldn't be interesting if we just flipped the script and we brought in a saxophonist and a guitar player.
Yes, which definitely changed the sound, but didn't change what the intention was.
You're so on it,
Do you know, like it wasn't like,
thank you for
all of a
noticing
sudden,
that.
Oh yeah, I know.
The language is there.
The language is there, and that's one of the things that I with this podcast that I feel really strongly about is demystifying to people that the creative process, and it's like it's not a. I think they imagine that it's, like you said, it's leader-centric. Yeah. No. Well, you're telling us something completely different. And that gives a context to then listen to the music and then listen to other people and go, I see what he's saying. Yeah. Or because you're giving us the tools for the power of observation.
Yes.
The power to absorb it the way it needs to be absorbed. So then it changes us.
Yes.
To then go, I'm ready. I'm ready for that crazy, whacked up, like Heart of Glass, which I call.
Yeah.
This is the first word when I heard your band play Heart of Glass. I went, that is whacked, but I love it. that was my phrase.
Well,
I was at my house by myself with my cats. I went, that was whacked. And my
Yeah.
cat's sitting next to me. I'm like, yeah, Tony, that was pretty cool.
Definitely out.
But that was the whole thing. Like that, and that's when I was like, reimagined. He has reimagined this song that I can now say that is a cover, a reimagined cover. That's what I want from a cover now. So
Yeah.
now I'm going to be expecting covers like "Don't Give Me Note for Note."
Oh, that's nothing worse than that.
Oh,
I've never even understood that.
Then what was the point? Like, please stop. Like, I need you to.
And especially when people learn about the history of jazz and realize the American Standard Songbook were the pop songs of the day. So if you think about the construct of standards in jazz, they're reimagining musicals. You're reimagining the songs that people knew from the 40s and 50s and all these things, from musicals and from pre-rock pop radio or whatever. And so, Surrey with a fringe on top might seem like whatever, but it was a song at the day that people knew. And then jazz musicians were like, let's expand the harmony. Let's play solos on it. We take the lyrics out and whatever. And so for us, it was like we always had original music as mostly, but the way we thought to imagine, which was not new. Miles Davis played, for instance, Time After Time and all these other things. Yeah. For us, though, it became John Coltrane, My Favorite Things, and then you had people from our generation looking at, jazz musicians always like to look at the Beatles and all these things. We decided early on, if we were going to look at other music, besides our originals, we felt like we wanted to try to go after music you wouldn't necessarily consider could be the backbone for some improvising.
Yeah. Okay.
So you're not at a jam session in jazz saying, "You guys know Heart of Glass?" It's like that's not going to happen.
Not going to happen.
Yeah.
Or Aphex Twins,
Aphex Twins, or everybody counted off,
or Iron Man from Black Sabbath. Exactly. I was like, oh my god! I'm like, yeah.
You're exactly right, Rodney. So that's the point. Is it was like it presented a challenge to look at the texts of that music and to see what we could do to personalize it, knowing that there was a strong thematic, melodic hook in there that we could torch if we wanted to. We could put strong winds against it and to see if it could fall or see if it would hang in there.
I'm Bonnie Miles, Membership Coordinator of CET. Thank you for listening to Rodney Veal's Inspired By. This podcast is a production of CET and ThinkTV, two local PBS stations. As PBS stations, the work we do online, on air, and in the community is supported by listeners like you. If you're enjoying the show and would like to support our work, please consider becoming a member at cetconnect.org or thinktv.org. Plus, when you sign up to donate at least $5 a month, you'll get access to special members-only streaming videos on the PBS app through Passport. Learn more at cetconnect.org or thinktv.org.
If you're enjoying this conversation, The Art Show, also hosted by Rodney Veal, is available to stream anytime from anywhere on YouTube or the PBS app.
And you're twisting your mind. That's why I'm so intrigued by it. It's like you're twisting it in your head and then it's coming through the body. And I know the mind is the most essential part of this, and memory and thoughts and ideas, and that you have. When there's one of my favorite, like absolute, I did a thesis on William Forsythe as a choreographer, and he said, these are just tools in your tool belt. Mm-hmm. You need to have as many tools in your tool belt as possible. And I was like, this is a universal. I was like, this is use all your tools.
Absolutely. And be open to it.
Be open to it. Mm-hmm. Don't say, I can't design the album cover.
Yeah.
I can't be a visual artist. Yeah. And let me conceive of music for scores because you scored short films. Yep. I mean, you've done these things. And so the tools in the tool belt in many ways are the key to the unlimited possibilities.
Yes. So you can say Heart of Glass can be a jazz song.
Yes.
You can just allow.
It's allowed to happen.
So now what do we do now that we allowed it? And that was the question.
And which kicked open a door to, I think, being that sort of influence to other people taking on the mantle of imagination. Yeah. And because one of the things that was really, really interesting, because we talked about it off the microphone or so out of the space. It was these interactions, these experiences. Like, how did you then have an experience with someone like Mark Morris, who is notoriously, I'm not going to use the word difficult, because that would be, that is just very, that's very damning, and I don't want him to meet me in a dark alley because he would hurt me. And neither would I. But he's very exacting. Yeah. I think that's the better phrase. I think he's very exacting, but what he produces, well, okay, I give you the grace to. Talk about dancing within the music. Incredible. So you have this palette of sound that's so fascinating from a choreographic standpoint. What was the pieces that you worked with him on?
I'll tell you, knowing your dance background, I gleefully want to tell you these experiences because they were so singular. Of course, one of the things that we did was when we first worked with Mark. Ethan, the pianist of the Bad Plus, had a relationship with Mark as his accompanist on several pieces before we had formed the band. He had a pretty great relationship with Mark as far as working with the company, either playing for rehearsals that turned into he's like a rehearsal pianist that turned into him being one of the accompanist musicians for certain pieces, and that led to Mark hearing when we formed the band. Mark became aware of us, and then the ascent of the band started, and Mark was kind of keenly aware because he works with music, so as you know, it's one of his things, right? So it's like, and live music is his thing.
Totally.
And so so when we were presented with this idea, when Mark was first talked to us about perhaps collaborating on a project, it was of course like incredible to just all of a sudden you find yourself in the room with this extremely sizable energy and
force of nature.
Yeah, force of nature, true force of nature, and true visionary of us. He's a true singular visionary in a very rich world of visionaries. And it was just sort of like you it's almost like you probably know this too, when you're in the room with people that for how complex they can be and how whatever they are, you get a sense immediately of the energy of somebody that is in complete control of what they would like to do. Like if they have vulnerability, you don't quite see it. How about that?
Right, yeah. That's a good way of putting it.
We know that they all do.
We're not. I know they're human because I know that. Yeah, I know you don't have like mechanical parts.
Yeah.
But there's but that singularity of vision,
that knowing of something, or that confidence in what they want.
I'm in awe.
Yeah, that's a powerful. Intent is extremely powerful, as we know.
Yes, it is.
And when you've got the acumen and you've got the life experience and you've got it all dialed, which he does, and he obviously was a brilliant dancer and the highest level, and so you have the whole package is standing there in front of you, and he's talking. Was always very nice to us, and very respectful of our process, but also, like you said, watching someone that very, very, very exacting, extremely intense with the dancers in a of course in a very obviously also loving way, but it's a family, and he's there. Like there'd be a rehearsal happening. One of my stories I have for you is there'd be a rehearsal, and then there's the dancer that's sort of interpreting Mark's thing for the rehearsal. I don't know what you call that person, but it's his right-hand person. Almost like assistant director.
It's like his right-hand person.
Yeah, who knows the dance.
But it's not really a repetitor because that's usually when the other artist is in the room.
Right.
So it really is because Mark is Mark, and so he knows,
yes.
You show them the steps.
Show them the step. So they're sitting there, and he's sitting next to him, and we're working. We're at the point where we're merging what we had to do for this piece we made called Violet Cavern. We had to write a score to these very set rhythms that he had choreographed to, and then we started to put it together. And that was when we were in the room with him, the dancers, and then the main dancer that he would have kind of speaking. But the funny thing that I realized right away, and I was I've never experienced this before. I went straight to the top. Like I'm like, here I am.
You skipped a whole bunch.
I skipped a lot of steps with dancers.
Yeah, a lot of dances. You went straight to the mothership, actually,
like,
as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, most certainly. So I'm in the room with the John Coltrane of dance.
Pretty much.
And he's standing there just like, you've got Alvin Ailey, you got all these people, and you've got Mark. He's in the conversation, right?
He's totally in the conversation.
So then it's like, okay, Merce Cunningham, Mark, they're there. So here he is, and he's like, the interpretive person is saying the things, and Mark is sitting next to them, and I'm kind of watching this sort of in the band pit area. Even though we're on stage, we were just like, I'm watching Mark. I'm just all eyes on him, and he's just sitting there, just like. And the second that the person that was supposed to say the things would start talking, he would immediately interrupt it every time. And I just thought it was the most incredible. Like, they'd be like, so what we want to do? Actually, you know what? Well, and it would just be this like this thrilling impatience.
It was
just like oh my
God.
God.
Get out of my way.
Like, you know what? I'll do it.
Yeah.
But then he would do it, and then it would back down, and then the energy would calm down, and then the calm version of his interpretations would be like, so what we want to base, so what you guys, and then within seconds,
He'd interrupt again.
Just jump in again,
Yeah.
and do it, and it was just brilliant what he was saying. He was very direct, and then he would sit back like this again, just smoldering, staring at everyone. And then he would look at us and be like, "Sounds great, yes." He'd give us like a little bit of a little juice for us to.
Right, and it was enough. Like he was like, he knows.
He gave us a little you guys are fine.
But he saw his movie.
But he's watching the movie, and so the one time I got to tell you, as a dancer and as a choreographer, there was one moment I bring up all the time. We ended up doing two things with him. We did this piece, Violet Cavern. We ended up playing it premiering it at BAM, and we toured it a little bit in Europe and in the States. And then he actually did choreograph To Our Rite of Spring. He did a dance called Spring, 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 and we played it a few times, and we couldn't tour it as much. But we did it at Ojai. We did it at Ojai. We did it a few other places where we performed live with his company, doing his dance to our Rite of
tours
Spring.
All the country in specific spots.
Anyway, that's another story. But this moment I'll just tell you about where he was doing the same thing where we were rehearsing. And I'll never forget this. It might have been the Spring, Spring, Spring piece, but I think it was Violet Cavern now that I think about it. And he was watching some movement. And of course, just watching his brain go and watching what they're doing and learning about understanding modern dance and all the way that it relates to what we do and the invention of these moves and the invention. It's just sort of like, it's almost like Stravinsky is like, well, it goes this way because I like the way it sounds. And it's almost like I like the way you move like this because it looks good.
So it look good.
It works.
It works. And no second guessing of the sequencing of steps. It's like, boop, there you go.
Yep, and the different body types that he uses and all of these great ways of using counterpoint where he's got this person doing. I saw the music in it. Yes. I saw why he's so musical. Yeah. Right. And so I was getting it, and was like, here he is, and he's way beyond he doesn't dance anymore. He doesn't do anything. He's just there doing the thing. I bring that up only because he's watching something go down and it's not happening the way that he was seeing it, and he was getting frustrated and all of a sudden, he just says, "Yeah, all right," and he goes up on stage. Now, maybe this happens more often than I was privy to, but I never saw him get up in all the rehearsals
and all the times
and all the
previously
in all the dress rehearsals and all the everything. He never got up there and did it himself. And he was always just sort of on the fringes or yelling things or doing whatever. And he went up on stage. And we were standing there like this, and we're like, oh, here he goes. And he goes up, and he all of a sudden transformed and did the move that he was, and it was incredible. It was like the difference was mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And here he is. At that point, I don't want to age him, but he was
up there. I mean,
way beyond his dancing years. And he crushed it. It was like, and everyone, young, amazing dancers, perfect physiques. They were like, damn. Yeah, and there he is.
There he is.
And there he appeared. He just went, no. And then it just went like, it was just like, and it was just like, we were like, he transformed physically right in front of our eyes.
Yeah,
and that's when you're just like, you know what, man? How inspiring! He was that guy, and it can affect the way you think about your own work, because we felt that way about our work. We're confident in our work. No one's going to sit there and say, we don't know what we're doing. We know what we're doing.
You know what you're doing. You
We
absolutely
know
what
we
you're
can do
doing.
the same thing.
Yeah.
We can show up
Yeah.
we can show up at a master class and throw down. You want to call a standard, we can play it. You can do whatever. We can do it. But when you step outside yourself and you see that person that's sort of like in their world, that's a top several handful
Full of
person,
Truly.
and it's sort of like, dang,
Yeah.
there's a gear that even wherever he's at, he just moves, and you feel the life in there.
You literally feel molecules.
Oh yeah, it's an earthquake
Earthquake.
of
Absolutely.
information. It's just like,
Just
there it
because
is.
it is so, it's because that, and it was there all along. It was always probably there all along. And we talked about this a little earlier because we talked about when you encounter like the 19-year-old who's just jamming and amazing, and I've encountered that teaching some high school students. That I've gone, okay, I just don't want to ruin you. Let's
So genius of you.
just come on here. I'm giving you space here. Let's interpret this together because that's going to serve you more than me trying to teach you.
Yeah.
Let's play.
Yep. There you go.
When education becomes play, and
Absolutely.
so you get that experience with Mark Morris. I'm like, oh,
Yeah, that was it. And then we did a few other things with him, and I haven't seen him in many years, but I did like him personally a lot, and I learned a lot from watching him talk too. Yes, Encyclopedia Mind knows as much music as any musician, and his passion for music, and has led to some great conversations with him, and he was very respectful to us always. I think the only time he ever even had a curt moment with, I'm remembering one with me was, and it was so human, it was that I was so hungry. I was sitting there, we were rehearsing for quite some time, and I took a few bites of a banana, and I put it down by the drums, and he looked down there, and he saw just the banana down by the drums. He was just like, pick up the banana and throw it away. He didn't want to have a visible banana while they were rehearsing.
well, because the dancers might stampede you because they're hungry.
But also dang, I
say
should
that,
have known that, you know? It's just sort of
Right.
like, come on, that's not good manners to put the banana down by the... And Mark just saw it. He was just like, his hawk eye just went, his attention to detail. And it was just this
out.
banana peel. Not anywhere near the dance, not anywhere near the stage, and we're just
Well, not
rehearsing.
knowing-
But he was just like, wanted me to know, the banana does not belong
Not in
there.
my-
Throw it away.
Not in my space. Not in my world.
And I was like, you got it, Mark.
There you go. Yeah,
Yep.
I love it. That is hilarious. I never encountered him when he came and set at work at Ohio State, where he went to grad school. But the same similar sort of stories. He walked in a room. It's like the person staging it. He would just interrupt. It's kind of, I'm going to do, and it was like I don't know if our dancers are ready for that.
Oh, no.
No one was ready
It
for
can
him.
be seriously disquieting, you know.
Yeah, it's very
I'm like, okay, this is his style, you know.
He's intense for a reason, and that's why he is at the level he's at.
And
And
he
so
gets the job done.
he gets the job done. So
yeah.
and talking about experiences. I mean, it was. I can't believe I'm telling people that I'm such a fashion geek. Isaac Mizrahi playing for fashion shows. What the? I mean, did you actually do that?
Oh, absolutely. And that was, again, you're in a room with one of these people that is like, they have a singular space.
Yeah.
And it had a very similar effect, even though Isaac was far less overtly intense with his environment. Obviously, he's a serious genius, and he's a great guy. And he was, again, really kind to us about and he saw us with Mark. He saw a performance of that, and then he started checking out some Bad Plus shows. And it was like we had this way where people kind of knew outside the jazz world that we weren't just a jazz piano trio.
Okay.
There was influence from contemporary classical music. There's influence from electronic music. There's influence from dance, the world of dance.
And now fashion. And
Correct.
So all these things.
These things, and it was almost like these guys are going to be able to bring some other gear than just play some standards or play. That doesn't mean that isn't a thing.
There's nothing wrong with it.
Nothing wrong with it. But it's more like they wanted something else.
And it always came across as that he always wanted the fashion show to be more than just a fashion show.
Absolutely.
As this commercial vehicle, like, see my wares,
Yep.
place your orders.
No.
I need you to experience the clothes the way I envision them being experienced.
Correct. Even him asking a avant-garde jazz trio to play live at his New York Fashion Week show, we did it 3 years in a row, to even have him commissioning original pieces just to have that is so much different than the house music blasting at the Gaultier thing.
Yeah,
or
things
the
were doing
blah, blah, blah. You can name your other designer, and they've got
Yeah.
the sort of like, they're putting on a show, but they've got some sort of digital music experience, or they've got a string quartet or something you would imagine is more normal. And here he was like, I want this group. And since he liked it the first year, he asked us back. And we just started this sort of multi-year collaboration with Isaac Mizrahi. And he was very kind enough to ask us, he started to get really disillusioned, I guess, talking to us about that sort of couture fashion show world where that's why he doesn't do it anymore. I don't believe he does anymore.
No, he doesn't.
And he was saying just sort of like the way that whole construct, after years and years and years of getting to that top of the game of the thing, he started to be disillusioned on some level, and he wanted to do things like make clothes for people. He was like, that's why he did his Target line, and he does his QVC.
Yeah, right.
Think about it. You've got that guy, like top 10 fashion designers in the world.
Real visionary.
And he's doing turtlenecks for QVC, and he's having a blast, and he's like making clothes for people, and he's still doing it really stylish. He's giving them something real, but he's also being real. He had that working class realism in him. And a master, tailor, and everything that goes into being a master designer, and so for us it was like he asked us then to write his theme for the QVC show.
Oh wow!
So then we were like, really? So he was so generous to us, and he was just like, just give me a theme that's a jazz kind of thing, and we wrote his theme, and it was just like he used the theme for several years on his show, and he just, giving us work and just being kind to us and being a fan of the band and super positive with us, and it ended up being a really beautiful moment for us. It was like a 5 or 6 year period where we were dealing with Isaac and dealing with at least 3 years of Fashion Week, and then a couple more years of his show. And he had the themes playing, and he kept, giving us a little bit of money every year would end, and he would be like, I'd like to use it for another year. And we're like, amazing. I mean, this guy is just, and again, being in that visionary world of a guy. And so I'll just tell you a really fast story of that.
Oh, tell it.
Because you're a fashion guy, and I love fashion as well. And so this is a very similar to Mark Morris thing. So he came to see us at a sound check, Isaac, in New York, because he wanted to talk to us about what he was thinking about the theme. And so he's watching us sound check, and the pianist of the Bad Plus, Ethan Iverson, would wear a suit. And that was one of our things, is one guy always wore a suit for some reason, and the other guys never wore a suit.
Never suit.
So already it's sort of like, what is this? What is the image of this thing? Yeah. And so, but the best is the guy wearing the suit, it's just a cheap men's warehouse, not even tailored. His whole thing is that it's kind of crumply.
And a little like,
It's like
not quite.
He doesn't. It's like odd. It's like
he didn't go like custom fitted.
No, he didn't. And it's like he didn't go to Seville Row. He's like, his whole thing was like, it's kind of his avant-garde personality. It's wrinkly. It's every now and again wrinkly, or it's not the most tailored thing in the world. And that was his style. It was he was very on purpose. Like he wasn't trying to be like a dandy. He wasn't a Mac. He was like, I wear a suit because in jazz we're wearing suits, but I don't really know. I'm not a fashion guy, so he would just wear the off the rack suits. So Mizrahi, of course, has been aware of this for a while and loved Ethan and loved the whole thing. But he's sitting there watching us rehearse, and Ethan had this pocket square that was a crumpled mess, and just like not folded right. Not even close to anything. He's just put together like crumpled. And Isaac is watching us for a while, and he's just listening, and he's just like, all of a sudden you see him, he just can't take it anymore. And he goes, hang on a second. And we stop playing. And I'm thinking he's going to say something about the music.
So like, this is not working for me because he's also a musical guy.
He goes, Ethan, I can't stand this anymore. Come here. And Ethan stands up, and he takes Ethan's pocket square out. This is one of the great designers, like a guy that famously made a dress from a tablecloth.
Yep.
And
working with supermodels and the whole 9 yards. Unreal. Let's be very clear.
Talent.
Yeah.
And he takes the pocket square, and we just watch him fold it. If you could imagine just seeing like these hands move in this way, that's like he folds it and he puts it back in, and like fluffed it just the tiniest bit, and it looked like an orchid or something. It was like the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. And he kind of fluffed it for a second and then said, "There." And then he sat back down and never addressed it again.
What? That sounds so.
It was so like mind blowing. We were just like, there he is, man.
He's like, it was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't even listen to the music because that pocket square is
He
driving
just
me
couldn't
nuts.
do it. Yep.
He's
He's
like,
just-
nope.
And I was just like, Isaac, man, that's a bad cat. You know,
Yeah.
like he's
I'm
not.
surprised he didn't say, look, come to my office. I'm making you a suit.
Well, he probably ended up making. I don't know. You know, I don't know. I always thought that I would hit Isaac up for at some point, knowing him to make me something, but I didn't. I never wanted to like assume anything. I think he probably would make us
He
something,
probably
but
would make you guys. He might make you something. I think he would.
man, watching him do that was
But-
enough. I was like, dig that.
And that's the true mark of like you've been moving in these circles.
Yeah.
And still you're not. You know, it blows my mind. I just love it. I love the fact
Well,
that
it's so
like
inspiring.
these experiences that you've had and you're still having, and the latest album is fantastic. And you know, I was. It's really funny because I haven't been in my art studio in a while to make any sort of like work, and I just thought because I couldn't find. I usually make art to a soundscape, like what's playing in the background, right? To kind of inspire. You've given me music that is going to inspire a new series of work, and I was like,
thank
"This is
you.
perfect. This is what I'm trying to get to with the tar colored paper and this." And I'm like, "Oh, it makes sense." No, I'm like, you helped me make sense of something, so I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Well, we know that any mediums inspire each other, and I'm so inspired by visual art and dance. And
Yeah, because you're making a visual artwork, and you came to like you know, you're here in the Cincinnati area for that for not just music but
absolutely.
your art. Talk about your visual art. I mean, how did that like? How do you keep these? Was it just a manifestation of, or you always everything?
Probably just like you, always doing it, but then wherever it sits, maybe I don't want to assume it's always like you, but it seems like you're an omni-creative person as well, like somebody that's interested in a lot of different forms of expression, and they all feed each other, as we know.
Right.
And depending on how far you want to take it, you know, the discipline is the discipline, like we talked about. Sometimes you can think of creativity as like, even though we all need to zero in to get great at something, you know, like zero in on the micro detail and the amount of hours it takes to kind of get there. But being able to do that with multiple disciplines is something some people are drawn to. I've always been that way, but I always had to kind of prioritize music, but I always had a visual and cinematic element to the way that I wrote, the way that I would make records. I was always wanting to be a part of the center of the design, and then providing some materials for the records, either photographs, drawings, whatever. The Rite of Spring package, for instance, is all my work.
As a beautiful package.
Thank you. And so all these things become a thing where you're like, I've done it for this long in the service of maybe records, maybe design, and all these other things. I started thinking that I wanted to start flexing my love of just the work itself, outside the music, outside a record package, outside of whatever, but more like the drawings and paintings themselves, photographs themselves, and start to see how I would go about exhibiting work, or at least having the work be seen via a photography book or via a painting show or drawing show here and there. Start small, just like we started our vision for it.
Kind of, you know, you
And figure out a way
baby
to
steps.
baby steps.
Yeah.
And that's what so to start, I setting goals for myself of like, after doing this for 35 years or 30 years, I would start showing work from all different parts of my development and some of my favorite works. And I brought down about 12 or 13 pieces, works on paper that are showing at the Wash Park Gallery that finished tonight. It was just a pop-up show. So it was just yesterday and today.
just to get in, you know,
Yep.
like, so that people can.
Yeah, it's just a show, and there's prices too, but that wasn't the point. The point for me was to show.
The
It was-
show.
yeah.
I tell people all the time, like, so are you selling your work? I'm like, it's not about the selling of the work. It's like, I am in. No, like,
Not yet anyway,
Not
you know?
yet. If somebody buys it, great. If they don't,
Right.
great. It's still a great statement. Like,
Correct.
I will always say, great,
Yeah.
great.
It's much more about showing and getting
in
my
there.
feet wet on
Yeah.
on how to present, like we do. Like if you, the beautiful thing about you, maybe you and me, the way we can see see, branching out, you're doing your visual art. I mean, obviously you've always done it. I'm sure you've always done it and everything, but
Actually, no, I
Well,
danced for such a long time, and
there you go.
I set it aside.
There you go.
It was really interesting.
Exactly. And so this idea, though, that because you reached a certain level of excellence with your dance and your programmatic work, it's the same with the music. It's like, at the very least, I have a bar that I have set that I know and respect enough about, especially 20th century art from many different movements and architecture as well, that I have the bar set where I know I'm not going to present something unless I know I can stand behind it like I can the music. And that bar is set. I'm not going to do and here's a $200 drawing of my dog that's at a coffee shop. No.
Yeah.
This has got to be, this has got to be the level. And I finally feel like, you know what? I believe I have a body of work at this point that spans 20 years. I've been doing it a lot longer, but I trashed most of the early stuff. And it's like, or it's hidden in a cave somewhere that never to be seen.
Parents' basement.
Yep, parents' basement. Yeah. And then under the house. And so and then rotting. And then and now I have this like body that I think I'm like, you know what? There's a line here, there's a language here, and I feel like I'm moving to a place of maturity where I can stand behind it like I can the music. And at that moment, I feel like I'm going to start trying to show the stuff a little bit more, because now I can feel like it doesn't matter if it connects right off the bat, the road is long or it's right away. It doesn't matter. I know that I did the best thing I could do at this point.
Because it is no longer a consideration of other people's assessment.
It isn't, yeah.
Of the work anymore.
Yep.
And it's probably the same way it's the same thing with the music. Yeah. At this point, you've 35 years.
Yeah, I'm not asking anybody what they think anymore.
Right. It's like you could.
No.
Oh, you hate it?
What do you think
okay.
about this? I love it if you hate it.
Yeah, I'm like, great. Okay, I'm moving on.
Yeah.
Tomorrow I'll still be in the studio.
I like it. I mean, my philosophy is always, we say this all the time, we like this stuff, we think you will too. And I think that's the great outreach that you can do. You don't have to make it for someone, but you want someone to receive it.
You do,
but you don't make it for them.
No,
I don't think you make it for
the thing is, if they come along on the journey, like you said, instantaneously, or like a longer journey, like it takes them a couple miles before they finally get it.
Exactly.
That's not your responsibility.
No, it's not.
So this is a great conversation, and I wish it could be longer because we have these time limits.
Sure, of course. Sorry if I went on too long.
No, you didn't. This is awesome. And this is exactly what I feel strongly about doing these kind of podcasts, like so that people understand and get to hear the voice of the person behind what they're making, and understand the sheer humanity. It's not the work; it's the humanity. Yeah. It's the humanity behind the work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Get to know the human being behind it. I guarantee your heart and your mind, your body, your spirit will open up to possibilities. And so, I always leave with because I know that people are coming into this space and at different points and junctures, but what would be the last thing you would want somebody to understand and know about you and your creative process, and what that might inspire them to go, yeah, I got this. I can do that.
I guess the more you try and describe yourself, the more you have to just describe almost like how your view of yourself within humanity. I think that I just try to see that largely we all have the capacity to translate love through things. And if there's a way for I had a conversation with a very, very incredible, very famous visual artist lately about a few weeks ago about this particular topic, about creating the avenue that people can fall in love with art and music in a way that they don't feel intimidated, and they can reach it at wherever they need to reach it at in their life, whatever time. That there's something perhaps cerebral somewhere in there that could also be attached to, but that's not necessary, that they can meet it on its visceral and emotional terms, and also that you can be vulnerable enough to love something that can change the way that you view everything, that perhaps somehow in some universe great love, great music, great paintings, great dance creates less violence, creates less need to destroy each other, creates all these things in some sort of utopian backdrop. I believe the arts have always sort of inhabited a space of gentleness, inhabited a space of beauty, and the more people can not be intimidated and feel out of that conversation because art gallery, it's like to be part of that conversation in the way that it isn't threatening, it isn't pretentious, it isn't all these things that stop people. And in more like a conversation of, this is a conversation about beauty, it's a conversation about love, inspiration. You can take that and translate that to anything you're doing in your life. If you're whatever you are in your trajectory, where if you need to fall in love with something again, if you need to re-engage with the world again, with nature again, whatever, the arts and music and dance and all of these things are elemental parts of human beings' higher consciousness. I believe they're just a part of our higher vibrational frequency, and if we all know that's available to everyone, it's that you could just be an enthusiast. Being an enthusiast is the greatest thing ever. Just to be in love with something is amazing. So in my opinion, to get to know me, my thing is only about that message of like, I love it, I hope you will too, because that's a great feeling to be in love with something.